Alrighty, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this informational webinar on Social Security fraud hosted by U.S. Senator Bob Casey's office and the Social Security Administration. We're grateful for everyone taking the time to join this call today. I want to start by introducing myself and the other panelists on this call. My name is Andrea Guscott, and I am one of Senator Bob Casey's constituent advocates. Also on this call from Senator Casey's Office of Constituent Advocate is Hulan Michaelis. Also from the Senate Aging Committee, we have Madison Sloat joining us. And from the Social Security Administration, we are excited to introduce Frank Magny, who is Social Security's Public Affairs Specialist. We're grateful for his willingness to join our office for today's webinar. Before we get started, I will quickly note that if you have any questions, please hold them until the end of the presentation when we will have a Q&A session. We ask that you please keep your questions general and applicable to as many people as possible since this is a public call. If you have questions regarding your own specific situation, contact information for Senator Casey's office and Social Security will be provided during the presentation for you to reach out to directly. At this time, I'm going to turn the call over to Frank with Social Security to delve more into the specifics.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. This is a topic that is very, very near and dear to my heart. As an employee within a field office for 12 years, I would say that this topic has come up basically every day and has grown and grown in popularity, for lack of a better term, because of its prevalence throughout our country, our culture nowadays. So without further ado, we'll get into the slide presentation and talk about protecting individuals from fraud and abuse. Okay, of course, thank you. We're going to touch upon three different subjects here: scam awareness, elder abuse, and identity theft. And what we're going to find when we are speaking about these subjects is there are lots of overlapping themes that do take place. But our first topic, which is scam awareness, on our next slide, please. I will say that in my experience in working with the public as it relates to scam awareness, I find that many individuals really do want everything to kind of go back to the way everything was prior to just this explosion of scams that are coming to people every day. The number one request is, how can I make these types of scams stop? What can I do to stop these phone calls? So on and so forth. And what I have found is that I'm old enough to remember a time in which there were rotary telephones. Voicemail machines were a machine in your house. It wasn't just a software program. And many people look back to that time in that whenever someone was either calling them, sending them a letter, and reaching out to contact them, they had a specific reason in doing so. When you picked up the phone, a person was typically calling you because they had business with you, and even if it was in like a salesmanship type of scenario, there still was more of an innocent time. And as I was kind of alluding to before, individuals really are frustrated that many times, multiple times a day, there are individuals trying to reach out to them. And unfortunately, a majority of the time, they are trying to defraud them. So as we move on to the next slide, it's very, very important that we do understand that many individuals that are reaching out to individuals, what they're trying to do is they're trying to impersonate a member of either a federal agency like Social Security or the IRS. They might be trying to call you from maybe a healthcare system. And what you'll find with these types of scams is that they're trying to make people feel comfortable in sharing personal information with them and trying to lead them to an area in which you're going to give them information. So the first thing to understand here is that any person that's kind of dealing with this, which is many people, any person with a cell phone, is that um, what they're trying to do is they're trying to create urgency within an individual, trying to create a situation in which they feel like they have to share information with the person on the other side of the telephone. And in so doing, they might be able to trick you into giving biographical information because they're very, very pushy. They have a way in which um, they're creating anxiety within an individual by threatening them in certain ways, by talking about prosecution and those types of situations in which, especially an individual in like type of an elderly situation, um, very sensitive to doing the right things, and also unfortunately very trusting. So when we understand the threat here, we first find that there's lots of impersonation taking place here. As far as exercising caution, what we need to do, and this is not just us as individuals, this is with any person that we care about, we need to make sure that people understand that nowadays, if a person is calling you on the telephone unannounced, without a letter in advance or anything to that effect, more times than not, what they are trying to do is they are trying to create a situation in which they're getting information from you so that they can defraud that person in many, many different ways. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But for a person that is now going to be proactive about this kind of industry of individuals that are trying to obtain your personal identifiable information, the most important thing that an individual can do is secure their information. What we recommend is that you do not carry your social security card. But in addition to that, and this once again runs contrary to how most people have lived their lives, because many individuals I've found, especially when it comes to social security, hang on to everything. They hang on to letters, they hang on to old Medicare cards, and they, put those into, a filing system, so on and so forth. Some of those are more sophisticated than others. But in some cases, what takes place here is that a lot of information can be left around that a person that wants to obtain personally identifiable information can obtain. Now, the Social Security Administration and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services have taken many proactive steps to eliminate private information from Medicare cards. Those that have some background with this will see that we no longer use Social Security numbers on Medicare cards. And then the Social Security Administration actually used to send letters in which the Social Security number or the claim number used to be on those letters. Now, we have taken many steps to move away from those types of business practices. However, what you might find is that there are older letters, there are older Medicare cards that might be in the possession of some individual, and depending on how they're controlling those records, this is a situation in which a person, in some cases, a neighbor, someone that's closer to the individual outside of kind of a telephone type situation, can exploit to obtain those types of the information they would need to potentially defraud an individual. So now that we've kind of, are aware that scams are out there, we're going to move on to the next slide, which is the prevention of elder abuse and financial exploitation. Social Security has been doing everything it can to, for more than 80 years, to secure financial benefits for all individuals that receive our programs. But unfortunately, what we have found is that older Americans are now losing somewhere in the range of $2.6 billion annually because of scams, And then these closer type of scenarios, which involve elder abuse and people that potentially come within the person's home, or sadly, in some situations, people that are entrusted to be the caregiver for an individual. If we can move on to the next slide, please. It's very important, as far as elder abuse is concerned, that we all work as a community, and those neighbors or family members or friends should always kind of be looking out for older individuals, because it's very, very prevalent. And we should always be on the lookout for, as the slide is saying, red flags. We should always be, in active communications for individuals that we know maybe live alone or maybe have just lost a loved one. Having a proactive relationship with those individuals in our lives so that we can identify any potential red flags. And when we're in contact with these people, we have to realize that the world has changed dramatically from the time in which they were the primary caregiver of their entire family. As I had alluded to previously, the way the world works is entirely different. So it's incumbent upon us that have these relationships with neighbors, friends, family members, that we advise them on how to kind of proceed through, kind of a different changing world. If we can move on to the next slide, please. As we communicate with these individuals that we care most about, or we are talking to someone at a party or something to that effect, what we want to kind of emphasize to these individuals, as I was talking about scams before, is that many times a person nowadays that's contacting you via the telephone is really not contacting you with your best interests in mind. So what I'd like to recommend is that, basically, emphasizing that there is a certain distrust for an individual that's trying to contact you over the telephone without previously contacting you by mail, or in some cases, even if the individual has the best intentions at mind. I will tell you that, at least as far as the Social Security Administration is concerned and other federal agencies, we live in this world now where we have to contact individuals, and we know and understand that many of them are very aware of scam awareness. That, I think at this point, I think every person has had that phone call, that recording that's indicating that your social security number has been frozen. Please contact me so that we can unfreeze it, so that we don't prosecute you, things of that sort. So from that scenario, we need to help individuals understand that even in a scenario where it might potentially be the Social Security Administration, it might potentially be the Internal Revenue Service, it might potentially be someone from their supplemental insurance agency. But from those standpoints, they should always be encouraging those individuals to give them the contact information where they can contact them back, and just always kind of err on the side of caution, especially as uh, as it comes into play with elder abuse. Now, what's also important as it relates to elder abuse is that we should be looking for the red flags that you might potentially see with a friend or neighbor. These ones, as I had mentioned before, are isolation. We should always be on the lookout for individuals living by themselves. Um, on the lookout for maybe people that we care for more seeing any kind of unpaid bills or utilities that have been turned off. That is a sign of something internal within the household that's not going well. Either the person has a caregiver that is not meeting their needs, maybe potentially taking financial resources from the individual, or the individual themselves in isolation does not have the proper care network around them so that they know and understand or are meeting their needs. They've gotten to the point where they're not able to remember paying all the bills or everything associated with their household. Um, Unusual or quick changes to a will or other financial documents. Obviously, you're probably not going to see this with like a neighbor per se, but if you are a family member and have another family member that's caring for them, in an extended family type scenario. If you see activity as it relates to, the legal information and things of that sort without really no other reason, this might also be a situation of elder abuse. And dialogue as it relates to these types of situations is very, very important. Um, any type of missing medications, and then of course from a physical standpoint, if you do notice any type of bruises or welts, we obviously have a scenario here that there should be some type of follow-up. There should be some type of proactive steps being taken by, if not maybe yourself, by a family member, so that we know that these individuals who in many cases you find more and more individuals are choosing to stay at home, want to be in their house because it's very, very important to them. And in Pennsylvania, what I do recommend is that each county has an area agency on aging. These Pennsylvania entities are the forefront for prevention of elder abuse. And as I had mentioned before, in some cases counties are combined, but you will find in every county in Pennsylvania there is an area agency on aging. And there's also other resources that will come up in my slide point presentation, so that if you need any other resource as it relates to elder abuse, you can access that. Next slide, please. Here are some of the resources as far as, once again, we have a lot of overlap here: fraud, abuse, these types of situations. But I have had recent dealings with these area agencies on aging, and the nice part about these agencies is they're local. They have an idea of what's taking place in the local community. They can, in some cases, have a physical presence as it relates to an elderly individual. So that's where I would start more times than not if you do have a situation that you're coming in contact with. Next slide, please. So identity theft, for lack of a better term, is somewhat of the headliner as it relates to what we are all dealing with. It is the fastest growing crime in America. There are less of auto thefts than there were decades ago. There are less violent crimes than there were decades ago. A lot of proliferation for larceny or stealing from an individual are not revolving around burglaries. They are revolving in this virtual world. And as we navigate through this virtual world, we find that in 2021 alone, there were over 5.7 million reports of fraud, identity theft, and other reports to the Federal Trade Commission, which we'll talk more about, which has great information. And more than 1 in 5 people lost money in imposter scams in 2021. And if you look at this information in the aggregate, you're going to find that there is a great increase to this. This is becoming more and more prevalent, and individuals basically have to take a proactive step. There's no more ability to kind of like let this happen around you. It's the habits that individuals have that help them avoid this new prevalent way of defrauding individuals. So next slide, please. And the next slide, please. One of the parts when I have had exposure to individuals that are victims of identity theft, they don't necessarily understand how deep identity theft can go. It's way beyond the simple, okay, I'd like to get your credit card information, or I'd like to get your check information so that I can potentially make fraudulent purchases on your behalf. Identity theft really goes down to all kinds of other levels, because once again the world has changed. It's a matter of ones and zeros. It's a matter of information that everything kind of revolves around credit reporting. Everything kind of revolves around some type of electronic presence, and because of that, people are also trying to steal identities to potentially open utility accounts. Another great example of this comes into play with the IRS. We had a very significant thing that happened throughout the COVID-19 pandemic with the American Rescue Plan and other steps by the government in order to get stimulus checks to individuals. Identity theft as it relates to the IRS has also exploded. The reason for this is that prior to stimulus checks, you might have had individuals that did not have to file tax returns every year. So, what some individuals started to do was file tax returns on behalf of individuals that had not filed tax returns, maybe in some cases for decades, in order to gain their stimulus checks. So, this awareness of identity theft, I didn't give out my credit card number. I didn't give it. Well, information beyond that can be used in these other ways, and of course, this involves name, date of birth, social security number, so on and so forth. But if you don't have an idea that they're going to different places and doing different things, they might not know how deep of a lot of this can go. In fact, pardon me, one of the more common identity thefts as it relates to social security is using a social security number to work on behalf of another individual, which in a vacuum doesn't sound as malicious as those other types of scenarios. However, when a person steals another individual's identity, there are lots of implications as it relates to that. There could be potential lawsuits. There could be involvement with debt collectors, other kind of medical agencies. Another form of identity theft that can take place is that in some cases, people will try to obtain someone's identity in order to obtain health care, which once again, if you don't have an awareness of all of these different kind of sinister, plots and programs, they don't necessarily understand why it's so important to hang on to every piece of information so that this can be prevented. So, proactively, we're talking about PIN numbers as they relate to a debit card, passwords as it relates to any type of a site that a person might have already established an identity with, and this also comes into play when we're being proactive. If you know that you have an elderly individual or a person that's older that doesn't utilize the internet as much, but can see that there is being some use of the internet, what's taking place there is that a potential imposter is able to create online accounts on behalf of that individual in order to basically steal their identity and potentially in some ways even get utilities turned on in their home. So it is the protection of all things, and it's proactive steps like memorizing these passwords. If there are passwords, those passwords shouldn't be kept in like an area in which everybody has like access to this. You also want to try to be one step ahead of the common passwords that individuals can use, or mother's maiden names, or the last four of the social security number. Individuals shouldn't necessarily have those as passwords established, because it allows individuals to maybe better log into an online profile once again in order to steal one's identity. So next slide, please. Now, the Social Security Administration is in the midst of all this. Many times when a person does have some exposure to identity theft, they receive a scam call. The first agency that does pop in their mind is the Social Security Administration. And it's important to give some background to the Social Security number. The Social Security Administration does lots of proactive steps in order to protect personally identifiable information. We are very, very thorough as to asking biographical information of the individual calling into us or identifying an individual coming into our field office via their identification. But a Social Security number basically was assigned to an individual at the beginning of their lifetime or when they enter our country to track earnings throughout their lifetime, so that when an individual comes back to us, possibly disabled or more likely in a retirement scenario, the Social Security number tracks earnings throughout your lifetime so that we know how much we're going to pay in benefits. Social security cards are recommended not to be carried, and these cards should be kept in the safest place possible. In addition, having your social security number written and and visual areas or so on and so forth, not a good habit for individuals to have. And one of the largest things that we recommend and what we see the most is that people feel like the social security card is a form of identification and is carried around quite frequently. And many people don't even know, for individuals that do like to carry the social security number, they'll laminate, and in some cases, use different types of materials to make sure that they're more robust. But by doing this, you actually invalidate a social security card. And from that standpoint, that will add another visit to the field office if they ever need a social security card. And what I like to do is I like to tell people that it's more of a very limited amount of times in your lifetime that you have to present a social security card than it is that you would need to have it in your wallet at all given times in order to have it available. Many times nowadays, a social security card is basically only used when a person first starts a job or employment. I do know that for individuals that are receiving real IDs, another very, very hot topic, especially in Pennsylvania, these individuals also, in some cases, need to have their social security card for obtaining a real ID. But I can tell you that is only the first time that they obtain the real ID. And then afterward, when renewing, the social security card isn't necessary at all. So, from that standpoint, if you do see someone that is routinely carrying their card, in my case, my wife did it for many years, and her and I had a critical conversation about this. It's the recommendation that they do not use that as much. But a greater point that I'm trying to make here, as we move on to the next slide here, is that the Social Security Administration doesn't have ultimate control over how the social security number is used outside of basically our ecosystem. The social security number itself is a biographical piece of information that an individual will use in order to potentially open a credit card, take out a loan, very synonymous with getting health care. And, from that standpoint, the Social Security Administration, unfortunately, doesn't have a proactive way if you're compromised to stop another individual from using that, just like we can't stop an individual from using, a maiden name or something to that effect. We don't have a way of putting a fraud hold onto the Social Security number. So, from this standpoint, when people call in, we will advise that right off the bat, they call the companies where they know that the fraud occurred. So we're outside of kind of what I was advising before. We're more into what I advise if individuals feel like they had been defrauded. And what you now have to do is you have to create a case for yourself. And many of the responsibilities as it relates to the reactive to a potential case of identity theft is that you ultimately or a loved one have to basically contact all of the places involved, and you basically have to have individual involvement with the stopping of the identity theft and the potential restitution as it relates to all those. We're going to talk more about credit reports here in just a moment. And then, of course, we're also going to talk about the Federal Trade Commission's website, which has evolved and is a very, very good resource as it relates to all things identity theft. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So identitytheft.gov, this is a resource that I have seen grow over the years. At first, it was just an informational site. It had, phone numbers as it related to credit reports, things of that sort, advise individuals the steps they need to take. But it really, really has grown to a much more user-friendly site that can basically take you from step one through, the remaining steps to restore anything that took place as a result of identity theft. So this is a dynamic site, just like our own website, ssa.gov. There are questionnaires that will, ask people questions, and based off of their answers to their questions, this site actually helps them create a plan and does a couple other things. If we move on to the next slide, which prior to this site existing, individuals had to pay money for this type of stuff. There were private entities that would uh, help with people restoring their credit. My example was I was trying to buy a house probably about 10 years ago, and a fraudulent account that was opened by a calling card still existed um, on my credit reporting, and I couldn't get the financing for that account until I resolved this situation. Well, 10 years ago, I had to basically pay an outside agency to help remove that fraudulent report on my credit report in order to get that financing that I needed to buy the house. Well, this identitytheft.gov, as I have been reviewing it over the last few years, basically does the same thing that I had paid for more than 10 years ago. And from that standpoint, there are affidavits that this site can create for an individual. And there are pre-filled letters that you can send to credit bureaus, businesses, and debt collectors, so that you yourself can make yourself whole. You yourself can be proactive to removing information from ultimately these credit reports that control so much of in our lives. Credit credit scores, kind of denote this relationship to, okay, my credit score determines how much I pay on an interest rate on a loan or on future credit charges. Well, the thing is our society now has made it so that credit scores can impact obtaining employment. There are employers that check credit scores to potentially find candidates for employment. Credit scores are used for obtaining housing in a rental market, and uh, from that standpoint, if identity theft does take place on your record, you're best served to make sure that any fraudulent information that is on any type of credit reporting uh, database, you proactively have removed, because you never know when these types of things can pop up at a later time. Um, if we can also move on to the next slide, please. We, as the Social Security Administration, do remain as a resource for individuals. We, of course, can replace any type of Social Security cards. I would recommend starting that process at our website, ssa.gov. In certain scenarios, which I'm going to talk about this here in just a moment, we can issue a new Social Security number. Also, by contacting Social Security, by Social Security being one of the agencies you contact if you have been the victim of identity theft, there are certain records we can check to see if there are any type of uh, information on the Social Security record that we need to fix. The most common identity theft that takes place as it relates to Social Security is using the Social Security number to work. So what we do is we make sure that a Social Security number has not been used for unemployment. And once again, that can seem a bit arbitrary, but those types of situations can come up later, where maybe a person has tax liability on those earnings, and if an individual is listed incorrectly, they're going to come back. The IRS could potentially go to the person who has the Social Security number in order to obtain any back taxes, anything to that effect. So Social Security, does have a role as it relates to any person that's been the victim of identity theft, but then there's much that's out of our control. And from that standpoint, we will move on to the next slide. What we cannot do is correct your credit report. I'm going to have some information as it relates to these credit reporting agencies file the ID theft reports. So, as I was talking about the Federal Trade Commission's identitytheft.gov, um, what was being mentioned on that website is that you, in some cases, have to file police reports, because if someone had actually taken money from you, this is a matter for the authorities, much like if someone were to come take a bike off of your porch. So referring you to that site, having the affidavits, having these pre-filled letters so that you can reach out and file these theft reports is a very, very important situation. Unfortunately, the final bullet point here, and this is probably some of the frustration that an individual that has been a victim of identity theft. Social Security employees can't act as an advocate. We can't call the credit reporting agencies on behalf of you. We can't call the police stations on behalf of you. We can advise you what to do, but our field office personnel have quite a bit of responsibility as it relates to getting people paid, getting benefits started on time, and we do not have a role as an advocate. And in a lot of ways that can be frustrating, especially for a Social Security employee that is trying to give the best service possible. But we are limited from that standpoint. Next slide, please. What is most important, and what I talk about frequently with any person that talks to me about identity theft, are these three credit reporting agencies. And lots of it has evolved with these credit reporting agencies over the years, especially with an explosion of identity theft, especially an explosion of certain databases at federal levels, state levels, and things of that sort. These credit reporting agencies have had to evolve over the last 5 to 10 years and provide more services to you by not charging you money. In fact, there was a time many years ago in which you had to pay money to get a credit report. Well, nowadays, once a year, you can order a credit report from each of these agencies free of charge. It used to cost money to have fraud holds put onto your credit report. Now, because of the proliferation of everything, these agencies are much more available. They're much more streamlined, and they are much more user friendly, so that individuals can control what takes place on these credit reporting databases on a more proactive level. And once again, from an anecdotal type of scenario here, if you are advising a person, if you are being proactive, these credit reporting agencies actually have the ability of putting a hold onto each of these so that no one can really open any kind of new accounts in their names. So for an individual that maybe might be in a scenario where everything is kind of, and I feel like this applies to a lot of elderly individuals, where the bank account that they have is going to be the bank account that they have. The credit cards that they have are going to be the credit cards that they have. By placing fraud holds onto these credit bureaus, they might not have the ability to walk into a department store and open a store credit card right then and there. But I don't think many people want that luxury. I feel like many people want the peace of mind that there is there really isn't a way in which a person that obtains personal identifiable information from the individual can even open an account in their name, and they are not a soft target. So when I do talk to individuals, I do highly encourage placing fraud holds if they feel like they're not looking for any type of new accounts that they open, and that every individual needs to have an awareness of these three different databases that actually even feed into a fourth database, which is known as the Fico credit score. And as I had indicated before, credit scores touch many different parts of individuals' lives. And by being proactive, by stopping fraudulent information from being on these records, they have a better chance of it never taking place in the first place, and in so doing, not having to take those proactive steps in order to have information removed from these records, because it is a bit of a process to contact them. They're in certain cases they are going to request police reports. They are going to request documentation from maybe a credit a auto loan financier. There's lots of different steps a person has to take, and it's not necessarily impossible, but by stopping it all from the beginning, they don't have to take those steps, which can be very, very daunting. And in some cases, like I said, there's a bit of a cottage industry that has formed around this, where people pay money, and in some cases the marketing there is that they're going to raise your credit scores, but these agencies also can send these letters, can take these proactive steps to have information removed from these databases. Next slide, please. as I had indicated before, as it relates to anything as involving identity theft, um, please go to the FTC site, that identitytheft.gov. A quick note about websites at large: any person on the internet only need to see that suffix, that .gov, to know that they're in a safe place. As I talked about before, one of the fastest growing identity theft schemes that takes place with the Internal Revenue Service. In addition to the scams that I talked about as it relates to stimulus checks, in instances in which people have uh, custody of children. In some cases, people will file tax returns on behalf of another individual in order to obtain child tax care credits. It is such a large concern that the IRS proactively does have resources for individuals if they feel like they meet that criteria. Circling back, I can't emphasize enough in using local resources and in contacting area agency, county offices in order to help as it relates to our older Pennsylvanians, so that you can be guided if you care for an individual that has been the victim of either elder abuse or identity theft. I think in some ways identity theft is kind of encompassed into this database where maybe it's people on the dark web or something to that effect. Well, identity theft can take place when people enter another individual's home. Identity theft can take place when an individual maybe goes through another individual's garbage to potentially get letters that have personal identifiable information. So it's not just people calling and scamming and spoofing and sending emails or something like that. Identity theft can take place in the real world too. And being proactive and having awareness for all the different ways that people's personal identifiable information is stolen and shared, kind of better prepares an individual for these types of situations not to take place. And finally, the next slide. I'm available for any questions.
All right, thanks, Frank. Thank you for that, important information on Social Security fraud. We'll hold the questions off until the end of all the presentations.
Oh.
But now I am going to turn the call over to Madison from the Senate Aging Committee.
Thanks, Andrea. As she mentioned, my name is Maddie Sloat, and I lead Senator Casey's work on Social Security and consumer protection policy on the Senate Aging Committee. As you may know, Senator Casey is also chairman of the Senate Special Committee on Aging, which is able to provide services and advance policy on behalf of older adults and people with disabilities. In addition to the Senator's DC and Pennsylvania offices, the Aging Committee also serves as a resource for constituents. And if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. So part of our work involves the development of bipartisan products that can be mailed or accessed online by individuals across the nation. These products include our Consumer Fraud Prevention Guide and related products, which provide information about common scams targeting older adults and tips on how to avoid them. We have also developed brochures and reports providing information on retirement planning and financial literacy for older adults and people with disabilities. These resources are available in English and Spanish. The committee also operates a fraud hotline, which is available 9 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. It is answered by a live caller or is responded to via voicemails left on the hotline, and can direct individuals who have experienced a scam towards local, state, and federal assistance and resources, including those that Frank highlighted in his presentation. You can call the Aging Committee's general line at 202-224-5364 and the fraud hotline at 1-855-303-9470. And you can also visit our website at www.aging www.senate.gov and find all of this information there as well. And I will turn it back to you, Andrea. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you for that information, Maddie. I'm now going to provide an overview of how Senator Casey's office may be of assistance to constituents regarding Social Security fraud issues and navigating federal agencies. So you can go to the next slide and the next one. Thank you. So Senator Casey's Office of Constituent Services consists of a team of constituent advocates who assist constituents who are experiencing issues with a federal agency. This includes, but is not limited to, Social Security benefits, missing passports, IRS problems, VA benefits, immigration snags, SBA concerns, and more. It's important to note that if we cannot provide assistance, such as with state or private entities, we can refer constituents to someone who can best help. Go ahead to the next slide. So if someone is a victim of Social Security fraud or a scam, we can assist the constituent with contacting Social Security to report that their Social Security number has been compromised. And we can assist the constituent in contacting the IRS if a fraudulent tax return has been submitted. We can also provide guidance on reporting identity theft to the FTC and provide resources and steps to take to help limit any further information from being compromised. In some cases, we can also help constituents obtain a new Social Security number. However, this is in very rare circumstances. If someone's benefits or Medicare coverage is terminated as a result of fraud, we can also help constituents straighten out their benefits. If you ever receive a call, letter, or some other correspondence reporting to be from Social Security that you're unsure of whether it is a scam, please do not hesitate to contact our office. We can help verify the validity of the correspondence. Next slide. Thank you. If you'd like to request assistance from Senator Casey's Office of Constituent Services, either with a Social Security question or for an issue with another federal agency, please do not hesitate to contact our office at 717-231-7540 or toll free at 866-461-9159. You can also reach out via Senator Casey's website, which is www.casey.senate.gov. And we will now open this portion of the presentation for questions for Social Security or Senator Casey's office. If you have a question, you can click the raise hand button, which is at the bottom of the participants list to indicate that you have a question. I will call on the participant that has a question one by one, and I will unmute you. Please note that this is a public call, so we ask that you please keep your questions general. If you have a specific issue, please feel free to contact us via the information on the screen. So if you have a question, go ahead and use the raise hand button. I'll give you all a few seconds to click on that if you need to. Okay, well, seeing no questions, if you think of a question after this webinar, you have our contact information, which is currently on the screen, so feel free to reach out. But I thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you all have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend.